Alright, let's get into spontaneous fighting ability part 2. So in the first part of the video I gave a little bit of my background, and I'm sorry if that's not exactly an answer to your question, but I think context is important because you have to understand where I'm coming from. I was heavily influenced in how to train for spontaneity and fluidity by an American martial arts system. I don't even know if I would call it karate anymore. It's called the Way of the Sphere, and it was developed by Dennis and William Dwyer. Some of the backstory, I've heard the backstory, and if you really want to get it, you should contact Dennis Dwyer in Seattle, Washington. I believe he's still there, still teaching, and he's a hypnotherapist and a counselor. So the funny thing is, as I mentioned during my training, I noticed that I was getting better and better at flowing and being spontaneous, but I couldn't transfer any of this into action against the higher levels of resistance that you encounter in the real world, and what I would consider real world attacks like jabs and tackles and the sort of stuff that you encounter. And again, it's one of those methods where they don't really care if you learn how to fight quickly. It's more of a self-development thing, but I was just getting a lot out of it. So I began applying some of the training methods of how to develop fluidity and spontaneity, and now we get into something that we need to sort of label and understand. It's often called no mind from traditional martial arts background. Some people could call it a type of Satori, enlightenment. At the school, it was never labeled. But talking, recently, I actually contacted Grandmaster Dwyer and talked about my experiences, and I said, your style has been such an influence to me even though I never got really far in it. And he actually described this as what he calls natural law. Now, before you go off criticizing or expanding on it, understand that this is not the natural law that you normally inquire. When people talk about it, we're not talking about anything by John Locke, and I think St. Thomas of Aquinas talked about a term of natural law. It's not that per se. This is his own, maybe you could call it an idiosyncratic term for his understanding of there's a part of human nature that sort of, he claims, you already know everything. I don't know about that, but I know that there's a part of the human mind that processes things unconsciously, subconsciously, that is very fast, that is very intuitive. It's the type of mind that synthesizes things on the fly. It's improvisational, and it can actually happen in battle. It sort of has to. We are the most dangerous, aggressive predator on the planet. I mean, yes, I understand we can moderate our behavior, and we should. But we are a predator. We are a deadly predator. We are what I would call an omnivorous carnivore. I've heard some people say, well, we're meant to be vegetarians. I'm like, what planet do you live on? A group of pure vegetarians don't accidentally wipe out so many species of animals by killing them and eating them, and then killing each other and sometimes eating each other, right? You don't see cows just accidentally do that, all right? You don't see, dugongs and manatees just rampage and start killing crocodiles. It doesn't happen, okay? We are a very, very dangerous predatory species, and we're incredibly adaptable. And this aggression, this adaptability, combined with our history of being in conflict with the environment and each other, with other predators, means that anyone that had this capacity for sudden spontaneous new actions right, innovations and adaptations in the face of life and death, whether it was coming at us or we were sending it to someone else, has a more survival value and has a chance of replicating itself and passing that on. So it's something we have. And you'll see it in very meek and mild children sometimes. If you grab their favorite toy or something, a certain amount of kids will react by hitting an adult. Think about it. That would be like if there was a giant in this room, in outside my building, that was 20 feet tall in comparison to me, right? And just walked up and did something to tick me off, and I picked a fight with it and started punching it. All right, because the child doesn't have this awareness of consequence and size differential. It just knows that it wants what it wants, and something thwarted it, and it responds into battle mode. You see it, right? And so there is that part of that human psyche that society, teaches you to suppress, and it will start acting, and some of the actions will be useful, some won't be. So I'll give you an example of a not useful, and then a useful, and then a useful. So when I was in high school, again, now mind you, I'm mostly into Kung Fu and Filipino martial arts now, and I teach boxing and kickboxing for money, and I love it too. At the time, I was doing karate, semi-traditional systems, and I was also obsessed with Kung Fu, but I wasn't able to train with it, right? And another instructor of mine, Jeff Mack, we were teaching at Hamilton Gymnastics. And I was training there, and I was a yellow belt there and a white belt at the American Karate Institute. And he brought what he said was a relative of his. I don't know if it was a cousin or whatever, a guy named Al Pontani, which may have actually been related to the Pontani mob family. All right. But he was about 19, big kid, 55-inch chest, bodybuilder. He had a martial art background. He trained with, I guess, different instructors, and also Jeff's instructor, Mike, in a Way the Sphere spin-off called Dao Te, which became incorporated into Goju Dao Te. I think he'd done some Wing Chun, and so he said, yeah, Al knows some Kung Fu. And that got me excited. I'm like, wow, maybe he can teach me something. So Al came in to teach a class, and Jeff just walked off, and Al was, wearing a white belt, but he was just impressively built Italian guy, and it was the 80s, so he had like curly hair, but it was kind of mulleted or close to it. And I remember, instead of teaching a class, he's like, I'm going to spar with you guys. And he sparred with a little kid and just let the kid kick him and punch him as hard as possible to get him used to hitting. And then he sparred me. And, again, I'm new. I'm not a experienced martial artist at all. And I said, well, let me work on the combinations. We had this 3-step kicking thing, front kick, roundhouse kick, skip, side kick. I was really partial to kicks, and I began to throw some kicks. And I don't think I was going super hard. And Al just kind of parried a kick, and he just straight blasted me. He didn't hit me with a single one of these, but every time I moved, he just straight blasted me, and I'd be backpedaling like 5-6 feet, and eventually I slammed into a mirror. Luckily, it didn't break, and he was just punching and punching and punching until, just out of frustration, I went, and I threw like a kind of a right cross. We used to call it a twist punch, and I tapped him in the chest, and Al backed off and bowed. And I was like, that was weird. And what he'd done was, he had just overwhelmed me on purpose, dialed up the level of pressure and, violence and everything on me to completely overwhelm me and make it so that everything I wanted to do, I couldn't even, any moment I twitched, try to move to kick or something, he'd be up on me. And then when I just spontaneously reacted by actually hitting him in the chest, because I knew if I hit him in the face, I was in trouble, right? And made contact, that was kind of like my spontaneous moment. And then he decided, he backed off and saluted and reinforced me, letting me know that I was on the right track. It was actually a very cool lesson. And I met Al years later, and he was a very cool guy, and he lost some hair and he put on a little weight, but he was still a big guy and still pretty cool. And we even worked out a few times. I showed him some Filipino martial art drills. But Al, if you're out there, you taught me a lot, man. And if you're in the mob, I hope you're not hurting people, man. I hope you didn't become a bad guy, because New Jersey doesn't need more bad guys. It needs good guys. So yeah, that's an example of both me not being spontaneous and then me being spontaneous. And my spontaneity actually reaching the target under pressure. That's me learning how to operate under pressure, but in a pressure test that was safe for me. Mentally disconcerting, but didn't hurt me, didn't scar me, didn't injure me. It's actually a fantastic lesson. And I began to put myself in situations. I began to put myself in hard sparring with people that were boxers. And I'm going to say this about the Hamilton region at the time. There was a high level of skill there. It was possible to spar hard, and you could be like, let's just do hard body shots, but nothing to the face. And you could find someone that could do it even at my level, even at the level of a teenager. And, you could be like, let's spar, put on the boxing equipment, let's do face contact, but nothing heavy. And you could maintain that for a while. Sooner or later, you start hitting people in the face. They hit you hard and you hit them hard. But we could maintain that for a while, right? So that's one example. And, so there is something in the human mind and body that can respond and rise up to levels of pressure. And it can be progressively trained. So if I, for example, got to spar Al regularly, and as I progressed, maybe he would raise his level of pressure. If I had done that for 6 months, I think I would have gotten valuable lessons. And Al seemed to be the kind of guy who actually gave a shit about the people he was teaching, and about teaching them how to actually fight. But he only came that one time. But again, it was a tremendous lesson for me. It stuck with me, right? I'm like, trying to purposely land a kick or a punch isn't as valuable as going back to that spontaneity, the natural law, the Satori, the no mind, right? Now, that's the end of part 2. Part 3, I'm going to talk about another example.